Hello, everyone, and welcome to, something a little different. I've never done a video like this on my channel before. I've always kind of wanted to do a review of movies and TV shows that I really liked or didn't like, whatever, but that is not what my channel is about. I don't have a review channel for movies and TV shows, so I never did anything like that before. However, this TV show, The Last of Us, is based on a video game that I have played on the channel and one of my favorite games of all time. So I figured it was relevant. And I didn't get I didn't get this idea soon enough to really get this video out in a timely manner. Really, the next episode is just about to air, so I'm I wish I could got it out earlier, but I didn't even get the idea until a couple days ago, and it took me a little while to make the video. I didn't even watch the first episode until 2 days after it aired because I was kind of afraid to see it. I was afraid it would, suck. So I didn't even watch it until 2 days later. So from now on, though, I want to do an episode for each episode of the show as it comes out, and I will have the other ones out in a more timely manner than this one was. Anyway, this is just going to be basically my first impressions of the show and of each episode as they go along. And at the beginning, I'm going to do just a quick sort of overall my thoughts about the show in general without spoilers, so that in case you haven't seen the show yet or played the game and you don't want to be spoiled, you can at least hear what I have to say about it without being spoiled. And then after I'm done with the non-spoiler review, I'm going to go into more detail about things in the show that they changed from the game, because they did change a bunch of stuff. And so I will go into more detail about those changes and what I think of them. This is not going to be a scene by scene analysis of the show. Other people have done that. You can go watch those if you want that kind of a review. This is mostly just going to be my thoughts on the show in general and how well it did or didn't do and what they changed and how they changed it. Okay? And my thoughts on that. So that is how that is going to be going forward. And I would love to know what you guys think down in the comments. Let me know what you think of the format of this. I've never done a video review before, and it's different than from game footage. I can have as much game footage as I possibly could ever want to put in a video, and I don't get copyright striked for that because game companies like you to play their games online. They don't mind. But I can't just show the whole show on here while I'm talking. And even a certain amount of footage too much, I'll get copyright striked for that. So I'm going to be feeling my way through it with what I actually show you guys. I'm probably going to do a lot of still images, maybe some actual footage. We'll see. Let me know what you think of the format of this show and if you think I should make any changes. This is going to be an unscripted show. I'm just going to be basically putting out my thoughts, and I might stumble, I might ramble because I tend to do that. So I apologize. I hope you guys don't mind. But I didn't want to have to take the time to write a script first. I want to get these out in a timely manner before the next episode comes out, right? So that's why I'm not scripting it. Anyway, I'll try to be as concise as possible and not ramble too much, she says as she rambles. Anyway, let's get on with it. My overall thoughts. Well, first, before I say my overall thoughts, I want to give a little background about my history with this game that the show is based on. This is, like I said, I think I said already, one of my top favorite games. It's either number 1 or number 2 on my top 10 list. It kind of vies for the number 1 position with Skyrim because I just can't decide between the two which one's my favorite. They're very different games. But it's right up there. I've played it 7 times. It's been a few years since I played it last, but I played it 7 times since it came out. And I've watched lots of other people play it too online, other Let's Plays and stuff. So I'm very familiar with the game. It's I just love this game. I love the characters. I love the story. And so going into the show, I was extremely skeptical that they could reproduce the perfection that in my mind the first game had. And again, everything I'm saying in this is just my own personal opinion. Obviously, it's going to be different from anybody's, might be different from yours. That's okay. We don't all have to agree on what's great. But I think that the first game is great, and I didn't think that a TV show would be able to reproduce that greatness sufficiently. And so I was extremely skeptical about the show coming out. And I was like, oh, surely you can't, it just can't be as good. They're just going to ruin it. I thought they were going to either change it so much that it would be unrecognizable, or they would just make a carbon copy of the game, which wouldn't be very good either, because that would be boring for people who play the game. But I was proven wrong. I was actually proven wrong. I really enjoyed the show. And I was pleasantly surprised by how much I actually enjoyed it. It's not perfect. There are some things, that weren't so great about it. However, they are not deal breakers. None of them are deal breakers. None of them make me dislike the show. So that was great. Because every show, no matter how great it is, has little nitpicky things in it that you just didn't like. But they're not big enough to make you hate it or dislike it, right? So I was really happy about that. I was also going into it a little skeptical about the choices that they made for the casting. Joel is my favorite character in video game history. And I think Troy Baker does such a great job playing him that I couldn't imagine any other actor playing him other than Troy Baker. And so I was very skeptical about who they cast to play Joel. And I had seen Pedro Pascal in other things, and so I liked him in other things. I knew he was a good actor, but I just wasn't sure if he would be a good Joel. Well, I was proven wrong again. He's not exactly like the Joel in the game. He is different. Obviously, he can't be exactly like Joel in the game because he's a different guy. But he's a good Joel. He does the job. He's convincing. I got immersed in his character. He convinced me that he's Joel. He obviously is a little different. He doesn't have the Texan accent that we're used to Joel having. He's some sort of Hispanic descent of some kind. I'm not sure where Pedro Pascal is from, but he's Hispanic, right? And Joel wasn't. But that's fine. It totally didn't. It doesn't matter. It didn't take away from the character at all for him to be different. He is Joel. So I was really happy about that. They did change him a little bit in some of his motivations later on in the show, and I will talk about that in my spoiler review, that I'm a little bit on the fence with, but we'll just have to wait and see how that pans out in future episodes. It might not be a big deal. Now, Bella Ramsey as Ellie. That was another one I wasn't sure about. I was like, I don't know. Isn't she the little girl from Game of Thrones? It's the only place I ever saw her in. And I was kind of afraid that I wouldn't be able to see her as anything else. You know what I mean? And also seeing her, the pictures I saw some pictures prior to watching it of her as Ellie. And I just thought she looked too young. I don't know how old Bella Ramsey is in real life, but she looks younger than 14, which is the age that Ellie is in the game. And so I just thought she looked a little bit too young to play Ellie. And I mean, that's not like a huge thing. It's not a deal breaker again. And then the way she acts in the show, I think she does a good job. She's good at what she does, but I don't know. There's something about it that feels a little off to me, her acting, and it could be the director's fault. I don't blame the actress or anything, but there's just something off about it. And I'll talk about that again in my spoiler review a little bit in more detail, because I don't want to, talk about the actual story yet. Anyway, I'm still on the fence about Bella Ramsey. We'll see. She gets some parts of Ellie down really well, and other parts, maybe we just haven't had a chance to see her shine in yet, because it's just the first episode, and she's only in the last, quarter of it. So we'll see. Now, the girl that got to play Sarah, Joel's daughter, I think her name is Nico Parker. She's obviously very different from Sarah, which doesn't, like, her appearance doesn't really matter. She played the role really well. I kind of wish she was a little younger. Sarah in the game is 11, and this Nico Parker, I don't know how old she is either in real life, but she looks to be around 13 or 14, and it just, I don't know, it kind of messed with my head a little bit at first, but in the end, it really isn't that big of a deal. It did kind of make it feel like she wasn't as little and helpless as the Sarah in the game. And when Joel was carrying her after she got injured, it looked really hard for him to carry her because she was really, bigger than an 11-year-old. And so I think it just would have been better. It would have looked better if she was smaller and younger. But that, again, is just a nitpick. It's just a nitpick. It doesn't really matter in the end. Anyways, the woman who plays Tess, I can't remember her name off the top of my head. She was a spot-on Tess. The only thing I didn't like about her was the way they did her hair. It just bothered me. It was always really messy, and it looked like it was just going to fall out of its tie or whatever it was. Her hair bothered me, but again, just a nitpick. It doesn't matter. And of course, they got Merle Dandridge, the same woman who plays Marlene in the game, plays her in the show as well, which was a very nice surprise. I don't think I knew that she was going to play Marlene in the show too. So that was cool, because in the game they actually modeled the game characters sort of after the actors who play them. Not exactly, like not a exact carbon copy of them, but they were inspired by the actors who played them. And so Merle Dandridge actually kind of looks a little bit like Marlene, and she definitely sounds like her. So that was fun. So those are my thoughts about the characters so far without giving away any spoilers. And I guess just overall, I think it was a pretty good show. I really enjoyed it. I went away from it looking forward to the next episode. And I can't say the same for a lot of shows that have been coming out lately. So I definitely will be watching the others and doing reviews about them. Now, speaking of reviews, that is the end of the non-spoiler review. So if you haven't seen the show yet, or you haven't played the game and don't want to be spoiled, put this video in your watch later and come back after you've seen it already. And let's get on with the spoiler review. Now, I'm only going to be talking about the things they changed and not a scene-by-scene analysis. So, the very first thing that they changed is the very first thing in the game. The game started with Joel coming home late from work, and Sarah gives him his watch that had been broken. She gives it to him for his birthday because she got it fixed. The show does have that scene in it, but it's not the first scene anymore. It starts in the past, in the 1960s, at a talk show where these two scientists are talking about global pandemics and what they'll do if one were to happen. And the one scientist is talking about viruses, and the other scientist says, no, that's not what we really need to worry about. We need to worry about funguses. And everyone kind of laughs, like, ha, ha, ha. But then he gets like really serious, and he starts talking about the funguses, and he talks about cordyceps and what it does to ants. And he talks about what will happen if those things mutate and stuff like that. And it's really intriguing. It's not boring at all. It's like, you can almost get chills watching it because you're like, oh, wow. He makes a really convincing argument. And so it kind of sets up the whole premise of the show, really. And so I thought that was interesting. And then it skips forward to, well, first I have to mention the intro of the show. It's got like this video of fungus spreading all over the place really fast. It's kind of Game of Thronesy, kind of looks that type of an intro. And the score, the original theme song from the game plays during the intro of the show, and I'm so happy about that. They didn't change it. It is exactly the same. That is one of my most favorite theme songs of anything. I think the soundtrack for The Last of Us is great. and I love it. And so I'm really, really glad that they put it in the show without changing it. So, anyway, so after the intro, we go to 2003, which is another thing that they changed because the original game begins in 2013. And then it skips, after the outbreak, it skips to 20 years later. And I'm not sure why they changed it completely. Like, I don't know for sure why they changed it, but I think it was so that the show actually takes place, the main bulk of the show, after the outbreak happens. It skips forward 20 years to 2023, our current year. I don't know why they thought they needed to do that. I don't know why they didn't just keep it the same. It's not like it will make any difference to the story. I have another theory about why they might have changed it, but I'll get to that in a minute. So anyway, the next shot is just the scene where Joel and Sarah are having breakfast in the morning, and Tommy comes over as well. And it's kind of just a way. This scene's not in the game. And this is the morning before the night where she gives him the watch. So it's that morning, and we follow Sarah through the entire thing. It makes it feel like she is the main protagonist of the show. Just like the game had you playing Sarah at the beginning and you think that Sarah is the one you're going to be playing, the show does the same thing by just sticking with her the whole time. It's from her point of view. You follow her throughout her day. And she goes to school. She goes to get Joel's watch fixed. And it really kind of sets her up to be the main protagonist. And so it sort of gives a fake out that way, because if you've seen, if you've played the game, you know what happens to her. Anyway, but this scene also shows us their dynamic a little bit more than the game does. I don't think that the game lacked dynamic. I think the game did it really well and concise for a game, because for a game you don't want to have long cutscenes where you're not even playing the characters. So they did it really fast. They got it out of the way as soon as possible so you could start playing it. And I think that the way they did it for the game worked really well for the game. But for a show, you kind of want to know a little bit more about the characters, a little bit more about their lives and about how they interact with each other, what their dynamic is. And so I think that they did a good job with that. It also served to build tension in the story leading up to the outbreak, because there wasn't really any tension in the game leading up to it, except the part where Sarah wakes up and she's in the house by herself, and you explore the house and the music tells you something's going wrong. And then there's police cars outside, and she can't find her dad, and something is happening, something's wrong, but the amount of tension is a lot shorter than in the show. The show spends, I don't know how long, but probably the first 15 minutes maybe, just building tension. And I think it was effective at that. It really did help to build tension. However, it did also create a problem, which I will talk about now, and which is part of the reason why I think they changed the date. I don't know. I could be wrong. It's just a theory. So throughout this whole sequence where you follow Sarah, they have the breakfast. They talk to the neighbors. Joel, they drive off. I guess Joel's going to drop her off at school. We see her in school. We see her take the watch to the watch repair place. The watch repair person's wife must have heard something on the news, because she gets all freaked out. She goes and tells Sarah to get out. You got to go home. You got to go home. And she closes up even though it's hours before closing time. And it's regularly showing you that stuff is going wrong, that there's something going on out there. There's police cars going by, ambulances, SWAT cars. There's fighter jets flying overhead. Things are happening. And Sarah notices all of this stuff. And yet, she doesn't ever try to figure out what's going on. She goes to her neighbor's house because she had promised her neighbor that she would come over and visit after school. The neighbor is a senile old woman and her husband. And so she goes over and she does her homework at their house. And there's a creepy scene where the old woman is behind Sarah and she's like acting really weird and opening her mouth really wide, and you could tell she's like getting infected. She's showing symptoms of being infected, and it's a really creepy scene. And anyway, then Sarah goes home and she turns on the TV and she watches TV for the rest of the day until Joel gets back at like really late. It's like 9 p.m. or something like that. And even when she turns on the TV, she still doesn't learn what's happening in the world, which I found really implausible. I mean, as I was watching, I was like, how is she not learning about what's happening? It's talking about it on the radio. You see all the police cars and everything. She never once tries to figure out what's going on. She doesn't try to figure out what the watch lady was all upset about and why she should go home. And of course, the watch lady didn't even tell her what was going on. She's just like, you need to go home. You need to go home. We need to close up. You should go home. And Sarah never's like, why? What's going on? She just looks confused and leaves. And the watch lady never says, there's an outbreak. The people are going crazy. You know, you'd think she'd tell her, but they wanted to keep it a secret for as long as possible. And it just felt a little implausible to me that she didn't see anything on TV while she was flipping through channels. I mean, this is 2003. This is before streaming services. There would have been commercials. There would have been news reports. And in fact, if the entire world was going insane and people were getting infected, and it only takes a couple hours for the infection to spread and for people to lose their minds, okay? It only takes a couple hours. That means it's happening really rapidly. It's spreading. And as soon as somebody gets infected and loses their minds, they attack other people and it spreads exponentially. That's why it happened in just one day. It spread worldwide in one day. If that was happening from morning until evening when she's watching TV, it would have been all over the channels. They would have preempted every single channel, and that would be all that you could see on TV. Because I remember back during 9/11, that day that it happened, every channel, every show was preempted, and all they had was news about the event. And that's how it would be in this, even more so, because this is a worldwide thing. It's not just localized to one country. And this would affect way more people than just, 9/11 did. And so it just seemed really, really implausible to me that she didn't ever figure it out. So anyway, it did help the tension build. I'm not saying that it was completely a bad thing. The tension built and it built and it built and it built. And you're feeling this uneasiness and this impending doom throughout the entire first part of the show before the outbreak happens, or before it affects Joel and Sarah, I should say. The outbreak is happening through the entire thing, but before Joel and Sarah know about it, the tension is building and something dreadful is going to happen. And so it was effective doing that, whereas the game didn't have that. But it left that sort of plot hole where she just kind of is clueless and doesn't even bother to go look it up. Like, oh man, something really bad is happening, because it shows her noticing it all throughout her day. She's like, oh, wow, what's happening? What's that? What's going on? And she even asks the nurse that's taking care of the old woman neighbor, what's going on? And the nurse doesn't know either somehow. You'd think she'd go look at the TV. She'd go turn on a news station, or she'd go get online and look. And that's another reason why I think maybe they changed the time period that it takes place in. 2003, it was a lot harder to, well, we had internet access, obviously, back then, but a lot of people still had dial-up. I did. I still had dial-up in 2003. It was not as easy to get a hold of information at a moment's notice back then. We didn't have smartphones. The internet was something that you just did once in a while. People didn't spend all their time on the internet like they do now. And so maybe they put it in the past like that, so far in the past in 2003, to make it so that it's not as plausible that she would just come across this information randomly without searching for it. But I still think she naturally would have searched for it. I mean, I would have. I'd be like, what's going on? Something's going on. Let's turn on the TV and see if it says. Anyway, sorry, I've rambled on about that. Probably for too long. So I'll move on. That was just one of my bigger nitpicks about it. But again, it wasn't big enough to ruin the show for me. So anyway, it skips to the part where Joel comes home late from work and she gives him the watch. And that scene is not word for word, shot for shot of the game, but it is pretty much spot on. They added a little tiny bit of extra dialogue, but that's it. And it was a good scene. And while Sarah was at the neighbor's, she borrowed a DVD so that she could watch it with Joel when he got home. And it's an Easter egg for The Last of Us Part 2. The DVD is called Curtis and Viper 2, which in The Last of Us Part 2, we learned that was Joel's favorite movie, and Ellie was going to watch it with him at the beginning of The Last of Us Part 2. So that was just a little Easter egg that I thought I would mention. Another thing that was different was Joel and Sarah fall asleep on the couch watching the movie, and Tommy calls while he's sitting there on the couch and tells Joel that he's in prison and he wants Joel to come get him out because he got arrested in a bar fight because some people in the bar went crazy, and so he was trying to calm them down and he got in the fight and got arrested. And he begs Joel to come down and get him because it's Friday, and if he doesn't get him tonight, he'd be there all weekend. So that didn't happen in the game. In the game, Joel is gone out of the house when Sarah wakes up and starts looking for him, but we don't know why he left the house. Presumably just to go see what's going on outside. That's what I always thought he was doing. Anyway, he puts Sarah in bed and he goes and he leaves to go get Tommy out of prison. Not prison, he was in jail. Anyway. So then it has Sarah waking up, just like in the game. She goes downstairs and looking for Joel. There is a little Easter egg of Joel's guitar sitting in the corner of the house. Just thought I'd point that out. That was kind of nice to see. So this is pretty much similar to the game. She doesn't look at Joel's phone or anything. She turns on the TV, finally turns on the TV to see what's going on because there's sirens going on outside. There's helicopters flying overhead, and she's starting to get scared finally. But there's nothing on TV except a national alert, and there's a voice on there saying, stay indoors. Law enforcement is on the scene. Law enforcement is taking care of the situation. Stay indoors. And of course, the very first thing she does is leave the house. But she does it because the neighbor's dog, barks at her door. And so she goes outside to take him home. And the door to her neighbor's house is open. It's all really creepy and dark. She goes in and she discovers a horror show in the kitchen where the old woman who we had seen earlier, the senile old woman in a wheelchair, we had seen her earlier getting infected or showing her first signs of the symptoms. She's full on infected now, and she's attacked her husband and the nurse, and she's like eating their necks or something. I don't know. She looks up and she's got these things coming out of her mouth, like the cordyceps are coming out of her mouth like little feelers. They actually kind of look to me like the little things that come out of the ends of the Na'vi tails in Avatar. To me, that's what it looks like. But anyway, that's not in the game. The infected in the game do not have these things coming out of their mouths. So that was a creative decision that they made for the show. Anyway, this woman starts chasing Sarah out of the house. And of course, conveniently, right then, Joel rolls up in Tommy's truck to save the day, which I found was kind of convenient. It was a little bit too, Joel ex machina to me. How it happened in the game was less so, because in the game, Sarah never leaves the house. She just looks around, she calls for her dad, and then Joel comes in and is going over to put bullets in his gun because whatever he saw outside scared him to death. And he came in to get Sarah and to get a gun to protect himself. And as he's getting a gun and putting bullets in it, the neighbor, who has gone crazy, slams himself into the sliding glass door and breaks through it, and Joel shoots him. I think how it happened in the game is less of a contrivance than Joel just rushing up right at the moment that Sarah needs to be rescued. So I think I like the way the game did it better. But again, it's not a big deal. So anyway, Joel smacks the old woman on the head with a pipe wrench and knocks her out. And then they get in the truck and they drive off. The whole driving sequence is pretty much spot on with the game, even down to the T-junction with the signs. It's exactly the same as in the game. There's a little bit extra stuff. I mean, it has the burning house. Like in the game, they do drive through a meadow and stuff that wasn't in the game, but they get into the town, and again, it's blocked by hordes of people. They can't get away. There is some differences here in this city sequence where in the game, a car crashes into them, and that's how Sarah is injured, and they have to leave the truck because it's completely totaled, right? In the show, they actually have a fake out for that. So if you're a fan of the game, you're expecting them to get hit by another car, and that car actually does come at them and almost hits them, but stops just in time. And they're like, fooled ya! It was a fake out. And so when I saw that, I was like, well, then how are they going to get crashed into? Well, turns out an airplane crashes into them. Well, not directly into them. It actually explodes some ways down the street, but I guess the force of the explosion maybe knocked their truck over. Somehow their truck gets flipped after this airplane crashes a couple 100 feet down the street. So that was different. I think they probably just did it to mix up the action a bit so that video game fans wouldn't be able to anticipate what happens next. And that's fine. I don't mind little changes like that. It actually makes the show more interesting to watch because whereas you know what's going to happen, the big stuff that's going to happen, the path that they take to get there isn't always exactly the same as the game, but the main plot beats are the same. And so the parts that matter are the same, just the journey is a little bit different, and I'm okay with that. Anyways, the way that they get separated from Tommy is a slightly different. In the game, they run into a building and Tommy is trying to close the door behind them, but all the infected that are chasing them are sticking their arms through. And so he's holding the door closed, and he tells Joel and Sarah to run and get away, and he'll hold them back for them, and he'll catch up with them later, which I thought was fine in the game. In the show, like a sheriff's car crashes into their truck, and Joel and Sarah are in an alley, and Tommy is out in the street, and they get separated by the crash. It completely blocks the alley, and so Tommy can't get to them. And he says, I'll meet you on the other side. I'll meet you by the river. So, I don't know. I think that was a little bit not as good as how the game did it, personally, but again, just a little nitpick. So the entire sequence where they run from the infected through the building and they end up meeting the soldier, and Joel and Sarah get shot, and the whole part with Sarah dying, that's all just like in the game. And it was done just as well as in the game. I really liked it. It was just as emotional. The acting was great in this shot when Sarah was dying. It was great. It was actually a little bit more intense in the show. It was a little bit more emotional, a little bit more like the peril felt more, I don't know, real than in the game. Maybe it's just because it's real people acting it out rather than game characters, and there was like a lot of blood. So maybe that's why it felt like that. But anyway, I thought it was done really well. Then we skip to 20 years later. And this is another thing that they added. The games 20 years later starts with Joel waking up in his apartment and Tess comes in. That scene is in the show. It just happens much later. So we start with this boy walking. He's sort of hobbling. He's got like an injured leg and he's hobbling along. And he comes upon Boston in 2023. And in the distance, you can see the quarantine zone with its huge wall, and all around it is just a wasteland of broken down buildings. And I've actually seen some reviews where people were confused why the buildings are all falling down because it's only been 20 years. They wouldn't have fallen over by now. And I think that's just from people who haven't seen the show, or people, who haven't played the game, and or people who played the game but didn't really pay attention to the details. It's like this because the military actually bombed the entire city except where the quarantine zone is, in an effort to kill off as many infected as possible. And so that's why it's like that. Now, it does give this exposition in the game, but it doesn't give it in the show. And so people who have not played the game aren't going to know why it's all bombed to heck like this. So I thought I would just let you guys know that that's why all the buildings are falling down. Anyway, so this kid walks all the way down to the quarantine zone, and then he collapses right in front of the gate, and the guards bring him in to some like exam room or something. And he's in a wheelchair, and they have him tied down just in case he's infected. They didn't want him to spring up at them, right? Since he's injured in the leg, he's bleeding. They try to talk to him, get him to tell him what happened to him and everything, but he doesn't respond to them at all. He just stares at them. And another officer, these are federal officers, he comes and does the little scanner thing on the boy's neck to tell whether he's infected or not. They have these in the game. If it's red on the screen, it means they're infected, and if it's green, it means they're not infected. And so it shows that the boy is infected. And so then they get a needle and, they put him down in a very, calm, sort of friendly way. They try not to scare him. They're trying to, they're being nice. So that's a different way of showing how the infected are treated. People who haven't even shown symptoms yet, but who have been scanned positive for the infection. In the game, it just had Joel walking past where they had rounded up a bunch of people, and they were scanning them one by one, and anybody who was infected, they just shot in the head right there on the street. That's how it happened in the game. And here, I guess they probably wanted to show it from the point of view of this little kid who's, innocent. He's just a little kid, and yet they still have to kill him because he's going to turn into a monster. And then it switches to a bunch of people who live in the quarantine zone. They've got this huge fire going in the middle of the street, and they're just throwing bodies into it. And these are people that they had killed because they were infected, and they're bringing truckloads of them. And Joel is there, and he's one of these people who are throwing bodies on the fire. And one of the bodies is, of course, the little boy, which I don't know that it was necessary to show the little boy being thrown onto the fire, because the subtext is strong enough in the previous scene where they put him down that he was infected and that they killed him because of it. I don't know that we needed to see his body thrown on the fire, but maybe what it does is to help show how hardened Joel is, because this woman who's also there helping him, she sees the boy's body and she chickens out. She just doesn't have the heart to throw this little boy's body on the fire. And so she asks Joel to do it. And he does, without even hesitation. He just picks him up and tosses him on the fire, totally emotionless. And so they probably just did that to show how jaded he is now, and how he just doesn't care. Nothing affects him anymore. He's become very hard. And then Joel goes and gets another job, standing in line for a job, and he gets paid in ration cards, just like in the game. And we get to see some really cool shots of the quarantine zone and how horrible it is and how cramped and crowded it is, and it just run down, and how people are just barely surviving. I think they did a really good job with it. And you get to see the signs of the fireflies around, and there's a hanging about to take place, and there's the woman reading off their crimes, and the only thing these people did was try to leave the quarantine zone or try to get inside the quarantine zone. That's all they did, and they're being put to death. And that just shows how serious they are about controlling the virus, and they don't care about anything else. If you're going to break the law of leaving the quarantine zone, you're going to die because you're endangering everybody else here. And Joel watches totally stoically, like he has no emotion at all through this entire thing. So then he meets with this guard in a back alley, and he's selling the guards some pills that he found, and the guard gives him some ration cards for them. And I can't really remember exactly what they talk about during this scene, but you get the impression that Joel might be a smuggler. Now, in the game, he is a smuggler, and it's made very obvious that he's a smuggler. I was a little bit confused at first when I watched the show about whether or not he was a smuggler in the show, too. I was like, so Joel's supposed to be a smuggler, but is he? I can't tell. I can't really tell if he's just selling some pills to this one guard or if he does this for a living. Because he's also taking other jobs for Fedra. He's doing jobs for Fedra as well. Just, grunt work type stuff. And so I was a little confused. It wasn't made perfectly clear to me. And also you kind of start getting the impression that he's trying to acquire certain things for his own personal use, not to smuggle. He wants a car battery, and I'm thinking at the time that I was, watching this the first time, I was like, why does he need a car battery? What's he doing? Because that's not in the game. Another scene they added that's not in the game is Tess getting beaten up by Robert's men. It happens in the game, but it happens off screen. We don't actually see it happening. She just comes in with her face all beat up and tells what happens. Which still does, again, that scene still does happen in the show, but here we get to see it happen. She's sitting in a chair in Robert's basement, and she's been beaten up by Robert's men, and Robert is talking to her. And Robert, he looks exactly like Robert in the game. So that was interesting. I immediately was like, hey, that's Robert, before it even said what his name was. Anyway, Tess wants a battery, a car battery, and she's trying to make a deal with Robert about it. And I was like, wait a minute, in the game, they're making a deal about guns. So why did they change it to be a car battery? I don't get it. So they haven't yet at this point revealed why they want the car battery. And so I was like really confused. Like, why'd they change it to a car battery? That doesn't make any sense. Anyway, right as they're making the deal, this huge explosion blows out the wall, which I found to be a little bit unrealistic. They are in a basement. And we find out that the explosion was caused by a car bomb on the street outside. And somehow this car bomb blew an entire giant hole through the basement wall. They're underground. I don't know how that happened. I don't know. I don't think it would actually be possible. They shouldn't have made them in a basement. Anyway, Tess crawls out, and you find out there was Fireflies who bombed a Fedra car, and there's this battle going on between the Fireflies and Fedra right there, and Tess is caught in the crossfire. And so she surrenders to Fedra, and they arrest her and throw her in lockup. And another scene that we didn't see in the game right after that is where we're with Ellie. Finally, we get to see Ellie for the first time, and she's chained up in some building somewhere, just sitting in a room all by herself. And these people, who we later learn are Fireflies, come in and do some sort of tests with her to determine whether or not she's infected. And at first I was confused because, well, I still am kind of confused about the decision that they made here. But I was confused when I was watching this because why is she with the Fireflies but as their prisoner? Because in the game, she knows them really well. She knows Marlene. Marlene helped to raise Ellie because Ellie's mother died when Ellie was born. And Ellie's mother made Marlene promise that she would take care of Ellie. And so Ellie knows Marlene really well. But in the show, they're strangers. They don't know. Well, I guess Marlene knows who Ellie is, but Ellie doesn't know Marlene at all. She's never met her before. And so I found that to be a strange difference. Why they changed that, I have no idea. I did later figure out why they were keeping her chained up. It was because she had previously, 2 weeks prior to this, she had gotten bit by an infected, right? So they had her chained up, so that they could keep her from harming anybody if she actually turned, which she doesn't, of course, because she's immune to the virus, to the fungus. And so they were just having her chained up, and they would regularly come and do these tests to determine whether or not she was infected. I guess they don't have the little scanner things. And then later Marlene comes in and takes off her chains and tells her, not in very specific words, that Ellie is special, that there's something different about her. She doesn't outright say, "You're immune." It cuts away before that. Marlene tells Ellie about her immunity off screen. And then there's a scene, like this whole quarantine zone section is completely different from the game. It just adds a bunch of scenes that aren't in the game, so that's why I'm telling you each one of them. We go back to Joel, and he is going to this radio guy's place, and there's like this whole line of people who are waiting to send messages to friends and family outside the quarantine zone. And it looks like Joel regularly goes here and talks to this guy, and we learn in this scene, and by the way, this scene is not in the game at all, nor is it implied that it happens at all. This is completely made up for the show. Joel is looking for Tommy for some reason. And apparently he's been missing for 2 weeks. It's mentioned in here that Tommy checks in every couple days or so, but it's been 2 weeks, and Joel's worried about him and wants to find him, and he's actually planning on going out to look for Tommy, but he wants to know about the land out there. He wants to know where a certain radio station is, and the radio guy says it's all the way in Wyoming, where the signals were coming from and stuff. You can't do that. There's slavers and there's raiders and all kinds of things out there, but he doesn't talk Joel out of it. And I'm thinking, why does Joel care about Tommy? Because in the game, they had a falling out in the past before the games, before the 20 years later thing happened. And they don't talk to each other anymore. They're not really on speaking terms. And Joel's not looking for Tommy. He doesn't know where Tommy is, and he doesn't care. He does go looking for Tommy later, much later in the game, because he knows Tommy was a Firefly, and he knows that maybe he could just dump Ellie off on Tommy. But that's not until much later, and that's his motivation for finding Tommy in the game. But right at the beginning of the game, he has no motivation to look for Tommy whatsoever. We don't even know anything about Tommy until like halfway through the game. So I don't get why they changed this. They gave Joel this extra motivation that he's trying to find Tommy. And I think maybe it's because they didn't think that Joel in the game had enough motivation. And so they gave him some extra motivation. I'm a little bit on the fence about this because it actually changes Joel's character a little bit. It gives him care about Tommy that he didn't have in the game. He cares about Tommy. He's worried about him. He wants to find him. That is not Joel in the game. Joel in the game does not have these motivations. So I don't know if this could end up being something that really changes things in the future, in future episodes. It could just be nothing. It could be nothing, no big deal. So I'm going to reserve judgment about it for now, but it kind of feels a little weird to me that they would make this change. I think maybe they thought that Joel in the game, just having the motivation of getting the guns wasn't enough, that he needed something else, that he would need something else to carry him and Ellie so far without just giving up, because why would he go to all that trouble just for guns? And I get that, I guess, but I don't know that it was necessary. I don't know. So that's just a little thing that they one of the bigger changes they made. Anyways, Joel goes home after that, and he takes some sleeping pills, and he conks out on the bed. And then later that night, Tess is released from lockup, and she goes back and gets in bed with him. And that is, they just go right to sleep, but that's it very heavily implies that they're a couple. The game very, 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 very subtly implies that they might be a couple. But so subtly that you can totally say, no, they're not. They're just partners. Business partners. But the show establishes that, yes, they are actually romantically involved, which is fine. I don't mind that. Anyway, the whole scene with Joel telling or, helping Tess with her wounds on her face, and she telling him about Robert, and then making the decision to go out and get Robert, just like in the game. We do switch to see Marlene, and this is actually the first time we see her in the Firefly headquarters. And it's basically, the scene is just a bunch of exposition about the Fireflies and how they're not doing so great and stuff like that. It's just literally an exposition scene. I found it kind of odd that these Fireflies have their logo painted right on their wall, so that if they were raided by Fedra would know immediately who they are. I mean, Marlene even points it out. And she doesn't point out that it's a bad idea to have it spray painted, but she literally points to it. And I find that kind of funny that they would do that. I mean, they're an undercover militia guerrilla army who's attacking Fedra regularly inside the quarantine zone. You would think that Fedra would be doing raids all the time trying to find the fireflies, and that they would want it broadcast exactly where they are. Just found it a little bit on the nose. Anyways. So Tess and Joel go down into the subway to take a shortcut to find Robert, to the place where they think Robert's going to be. And while they're down there, they encounter, or they find, an old infected corpse that's growing onto the wall. And it looks really great. It looks just like in the game. However, another huge change is in this scene from the game. And it's probably one of the biggest changes that they made that will affect things all throughout the series, I think. And I don't understand why they made this change. The first thing I noticed when they walked up to this thing is that there were no spores, and they did not put on their gas masks. And I was like, why? Why aren't they putting on their gas masks? There should be spores, because this is the stage in which the infected release their spores. So if you haven't played the game, the infected, when the fungus completely takes over their body, eventually, and if there's nothing around, no other things to infect, where the virus can spread to another being, the fungus basically comes to the end of its life, and it releases spores, just like fungus does in real life. You know, mushrooms and any kinds of fungus, that's how they spread, via spores. They don't have seeds, they have spores. And so when the fungus gets to the end of its life, it releases the spores, and then it dries out and dies, and the corpse just sort of crumbles away. They become really crumbly and dried out. And so that's what they look like during that stage. This corpse should have been releasing spores in this scene. Now, I've heard, and I don't know if this is true, because I totally forgot to look it up before I made this video, but I've heard that the showrunners made the decision to not have spores in the show. I don't know why. I didn't hear the reason. But I don't understand why that would be something that they would do. Because it's one of the main... I mean, it's one of the main ways that the virus spreads. You can get infected through getting bit by an infected, or by breathing in the spores. And it's also how some characters learn that Ellie is immune, because she can breathe the spores without getting infected. And so I don't understand why they would change that, because that really changes a lot. It also takes away some measure of peril while exploring the world. When Ellie and Joel are out going through the world, they don't have to worry about spores if they've taken spores out of the game. And that kind of, I don't know. I don't know if I really like this change. If I knew the reason, maybe it would make sense, but to me, it doesn't really make sense right now. Again, I'll look it up and I'll put a notation on the screen right now, what I learned. So that was one of the biggest changes that they made to the overall story that I am still kind of on the fence about. Anyway, the next change happens right after that, when Joel and Tess finally catch up with Robert. However, it's different from in the game. So in the game, well, after fighting through all Robert's men, which obviously that's a video game part of it, they don't put all these fights with multitudes of people in the show, because it's not a video game. So they don't have all these fight scenes constantly like the game has. But in the cutscene, in the cutscene, they catch up with Robert, and Joel beats him and tortures him to get him to tell them where the guns are. And then eventually Tess just shoots him in the head. But in the show, they just go into this hallway in an apartment building, and there's dead bodies everywhere. And it's Robert's men and a bunch of fireflies. And they apparently had a shootout over the very same battery that Joel and Tess were going to get from Robert, that they were going to buy from Robert. So, I don't know. I liked the other way better. They find out that the battery was actually no good, and that's probably why the firefight happened. But I like the other way better because I think it serves to show Joel as a character, to show what he's capable of, how ruthless he is. Whereas the show doesn't show us that. It just has him walking in on this scene of death, and yeah, there's nothing to it. I feel like it falls a little bit flat. Whereas in the game, we see Joel torturing a guy for information. We know he means business. We know he's not afraid to do the hard stuff. And so I think the show actually took away a character moment for Joel, a way for us to see who he's really like. They'll probably show us in a different way. And I think maybe they thought they were showing us in a different way later on, but I'll get to that when we get there. So then Ellie barges out of a doorway and tries to stab Joel with her switchblade, just like in the game. It happened in a similar way, but it kind of played out a little differently after that. Joel steps on her switchblade so that she can't pick it back up, and he holds her at gunpoint. And Marlene is there, and she's wounded just like in the game, and they have this conversation about the battery and about things, just like in the game, except in the game, Marlene is able to calm Ellie down and assure her that Joel isn't somebody to fear, that Joel isn't a threat to them. And so Ellie calms down, and then she's relaxed and she has a normal conversation. She's part of the conversation. She's not really antagonistic to Joel the whole time, like she is in the show. She just sits on the floor and scowls at Joel the whole time. Joel holds her at gunpoint. It's all really tense. And there's a lot more animosity between Joel and Ellie. Like, it's more personal to each of them, the situation that they're in. And that's fine, I guess. Like, it's not a big deal that they changed it that way. But so far, we haven't seen Ellie in any other light than antagonistic. When we saw her at the beginning, when it first showed her, she's really antagonistic toward her captors who are holding her captive when she's chained up. She doesn't want to cooperate with what they're doing. She swears at them. She gives them the fingers, all kinds of stuff, She's just really antagonistic. And in that scene, she does sound and look a lot like Ellie when Ellie is like that in the game. And so I was like, oh yeah, totally sounds like Ellie. But then later on, she doesn't really drop that act. She's like that through the entire episode. And that's what I was talking about before, how I was still kind of on the fence about how Ellie is portrayed in the show, because we haven't gotten to see her shine as Ellie all the way yet. She so far has just been this antagonistic little brat. She's constantly sneering and barking and shouting at people and just being really obstinate and just not very nice. Like, the show didn't make me like her. And Ellie is supposed to be a really likable, easygoing, fun-loving character. She can get really mouthy and obstinate, and she can be a brat, but she's not like that most of the time. And in the show, she's like that the entire time. And I can actually show you a comparison of a scene, because right after this scene with Marlene, after they've agreed to smuggle Ellie out of the quarantine zone, they go back to Joel's apartment, just like in the game, and they have the same scene where Joel lays down on the couch and Ellie's like, what do I do now? And, that whole scene. They have it in the show. So here is a side-by-side comparison of the two, and you can see how different Ellie is.
What are you doing?
Killing time.
Well, what am I supposed to do?
I am sure you will figure that out.
Your watch is broken.
What are you doing?
Killing time.
Well, what am I supposed to do?
I'm sure you'll figure that out.
Your watch is broken.
So you see, the Ellie in the show just is a little bit more confrontational than the Ellie in the game. And it made it so that I just didn't really like her very much because I don't see that sweet Ellie persona coming through yet. Not to say that it won't. Maybe in future episodes we will see more of the sweet side of Ellie. I hope we do. Because in the game, Ellie's really sweet. She's really likable. She's friendly. She's outgoing. She's quirky. And you just fall in love with her as a character. But so far, I haven't fallen in love with the show's version of her. So I'm not going to say that I don't like this version of Ellie because I really haven't seen enough of her to make a judgment call on it. I will reserve judgment until I see more episodes. Anyway, while Ellie is in Joel's apartment, she finds this book of #1 hits, music. And she finds a note inside. And it says BF. And then there's 60 and it says nothing in. And then it's 70 new stock and 80 with a red X. And Ellie, while she's in there, she figures out that 60, 70, 80 refers to decades of music. And somehow she figures out that B/F means Bill and Frank. I have no idea how she figures that out because it doesn't show her seeing the name Bill and Frank anywhere, just those letters, which could mean literally anything. She tricks Joel into giving away that 80 means that there's trouble, that there's some bad news or something. Anyway, so then they sneak out of the quarantine zone. It just shows them climbing up out of the hole. It doesn't actually show them going through the tunnels and all the different rooms to get out like it does in the game. They just climb out of the hole. They're outside. They sneak around trying to avoid guards and stuff. But just like in the game, they do get caught by a guard. And he happens to be the same guard that Joel was dealing with earlier. And just like in the game, he scans them to find out if they're infected or not. Although, unlike in the game, Joel tries to make a deal with him to let them go. Like, if you let us go, I'll give you a portion of our profits from this job, blah, blah, blah. And just like in the game, Ellie stabs him in the leg with her switchblade because she's afraid of getting scanned, and they'll learn that she's infected if she gets scanned. Because even though she's immune, she is still infected. She still has the cordyceps in her, so the scan will read positive for the cordyceps. She just doesn't get symptoms like everybody else does. So in the game, right after she stabs the guard, Joel and Tess just shoot him immediately, and he's dead. But in the show, they don't do that. He holds them at gunpoint. Joel puts himself between the guard and Ellie. He's protecting her immediately. And he tries to defuse the situation, but then he gets a flashback of when he was facing a guard at gunpoint while holding Sarah. And he goes berserk on this guard. He just goes berserk on this guard and punches him over and over and over and over. And you're like, oh, wow, he's still punching him. And he's still punching him. And he's still punching him. And Ellie's watching him. And he's just like in a rage. And she's watching him. And it's really hard to tell what she's thinking. But it almost looks like she's liking it. She likes the fact that he jumped in to save her. Which is a departure from the game, because in the game, Ellie is shocked by what happens. She's not happy about it. She's not happy that they had to kill those guards. In the game, there was more than one guard. But she's totally, like, upset over it. And in the show, it looks like she actually liked it. So that was different. It shows Ellie in the show seems a little bit more ruthless than Ellie in the game, and so I'm still not sure if I like that about her, that they're changing her character like that. So anyways, just like in the game, they discover the readout on the scanner and it says that Ellie is infected. However, unlike in the game, this is a very rushed scene. It's very emotional. It's very high stakes feeling. Like Tess holds up the thing and she shouts at Joel like, Joel, she's infected. And Ellie's like, no, 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 no. And she pulls up her sleeve to show the bite mark. No, this is 2 weeks old, blah, blah, blah. And then it like fades. The sound fades away as it like zeroes in on Joel's face. And we're like in his head and he's just coming down from this like high of beating this guard to death. And so we can't really hear what Ellie and Tess are saying about Ellie's bite mark. And then Ellie's like, well, no, first Tess is like, you better explain yourself right now. And she's like, I will, but there's no time. We have to get out of here. And then they run off. And it doesn't talk about Ellie's condition at all. Like in the game, Ellie explains the situation to them. She explains how she was bit, yes, but it's been 2 weeks. And they think that they can make a cure from her, that she's a possible cure for the virus. And I feel like this scene was just too rushed. This was like this pivotal moment because up until now, we don't even know for sure if Ellie is immune. It implies that she might be, but if you've never seen the game, if you've never played the game, maybe you might not pick up on it. It's very subtle. All you know is there's something different about her. The Fireflies want her for some reason, but it never says why until this moment. And so if you haven't seen the game, this moment might be not good enough to be satisfying to explain what's going on with Ellie. It's just so rushed. And so this is the only story beat that was actually in the game that was also in the show that I felt like they didn't do justice. This is the only one. It just felt a little too rushed. Anyway, this video is getting pretty long. I definitely didn't want it to be this long, but we are at the end. After that, they just rush out into the city, and it pans up and you see the broken down, falling down buildings, and it looks just like in the game. But it also goes back to Joel's apartment, and it shows the radio, and the radio comes on, and you hear the music playing, and I don't actually recognize the song, but it sounds like it's from the 80s. And so 80s means that there's bad news or that there's something bad, but we don't know what it is. And then it ends. It ends like that. Anyway, so that is the entire episode. And I'm sorry if I rambled a lot. I have really only talked about the changes they made, so I guess they made a lot of changes, or most of them aren't really necessarily changes as opposed to just added scenes. They filled in a lot of scenes that were just implied in the game, because in the game, like, you don't see from Tessa's point of view or anyone else's point of view because you're playing Joel. And so you don't get to see those things happen. Although they do happen, they just happen behind the scenes. So in the show, we get to see all that stuff happening. So I thought it was good. I just really liked it. There's some stuff about it that I'm not so sure about, but again, it's not enough yet to make me not like the show. I'm, of course, going to just have to wait and see with the next episodes to see what happens, how these changes play out, how they butterfly effect through the series. And hopefully it's not terrible. Hopefully it doesn't start falling apart. Since I do like this show, and I definitely like the game, I really want it to succeed. I want it to be good, and I don't want to not like it, So I have reserved optimism. I am looking forward to seeing what happens. But again, there is a little bit of hesitation there just because of the changes that they made and to see where they go. But maybe they don't go anywhere bad. Maybe they're good. Maybe they'll end up being just fine and I won't mind them at all. So I'll just be reserving judgment. I'm not going to judge the entire series on the first episode. In either way, the first episode is good. And each of these video reviews are going to be just reviewing the episode that it's about, and maybe possibly going back in time to review it connected to what's come before. But I'm not going to try to speculate too much about what's coming. I'm just going to wait and see and withhold judgment. And I'm not going to, if something horrible happens in one episode, that they change something so bad that I really don't like, I'm not going to just condemn the whole series. I'm going to wait and see what happens. All right. Anyway, you guys, I will let you go now because this has gone on way too long. So let me know down in the comments how you liked it. Was it too long? Let me know. Let me know if you think I should change up anything, how I'm doing it, the format, whatever. I want to know. And also let me know your thoughts about the show. Have you seen it? Have you not seen it? Are you waiting until all the episodes came out? Have you played the game? Have you not played the game? Have you seen the show but not played the game? I'd like to know what your perspective is on the show if you haven't played the game too. So let's have a conversation in the comments below, because it's the main reason why I made this video was so that I could talk to somebody about the show, because I don't really actually know very many people in real life who have played the game, and so I can't really talk to them about it. So you guys are who I have. So I will see you guys in the next episode. I'm going to try to get the next video out in a more timely manner after the next episode airs. We'll see. I do have a pretty busy schedule, but I'll try to get it out definitely before the next episode airs after that. So anyway, until then, you guys, remember to play safe, play nice, and have fun.